You're watching the legal breakdown. Glenn, we've got a jaw-dropping move from New York Attorney General Letitia James against Donald Trump in court. Can you go over what she just did?
Yeah, New York Attorney General Letitia James is asking Judge Engoron to order Donald Trump and his sons to pay $370 million and ban Trump, his chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, and the Trump Organization comptroller, Jeff McConney, ban them from doing real estate business in New York for the rest of their lives, and ban them together with Don Jr. and Eric Trump for a period of years from sitting on any boards of companies or corporations in New York. I mean, this will be a pretty serious blow to Donald Trump's ability ever to do business anywhere again, most directly in New York, but it's going to have ripple effects throughout the United States, indeed, throughout the world.
Now, what will this do to his ability to actually be in business in New York to that exact point?
It's a great question. It's going to be almost impossible for him to be in business. If the judge goes with Tish James' request, he will literally be banned. There will be an injunction, a prohibition entered against him from ever doing any real estate business in New York. There are undoubtedly ways he could try to work around that. He could use maybe his family members as proxies to
Right.
kind of try to get around. Now, when would Donald Trump ever break the rules to earn a buck? But there
Right.
are all kinds of ways he can try to put workarounds in place. But you know what? Given Tish James' tenacity in holding Trump accountable, I think it very unlikely that those workarounds would be successful for long.
No, this lawsuit was initially for $250 million against Trump. How did we get from 250 million to 370 million? Because that's not an inconsequential increase.
Yeah, that's a great question because when the suit was first filed, Letitia James said, we're going to be seeking a minimum of $250 million, a minimum of $250 million. And now, after an 11-week trial, including the testimony from lots of forensic accountants, kind of laying out Donald Trump's long-term scheme to defraud, financial institutions and others, she's come at a valuation of $370 million that she is seeking to collect. She's seeking to have Trump and his sons disgorged. That's the technical legal term. And she's hoping that Judge Engoron will order that amount. Here's how she got there. Now, mind you, Brian, I am not an accountant. I'm not a financial expert. I don't play one on TV. The reason people go to law school is because they can't do math. That holds true for me. I got to take my shoes off just to count to 20. But here's how I want to try to explain how Tish James kind of got to that figure. So, first of all, Donald Trump and his sons and his organization undoubtedly defrauded taxpayers over the years when they, for example, would lowball the value of their assets when they were going to pay their taxes, but then they would inflate fraudulently the value of some of those very same assets when they were applying for loans. And it is the applying for loans piece where they were defrauding the institutions. Here's how. Let's assume you're a billionaire and you go to a bank and you're seeking a loan. And you've put down the value of all your assets on your statement of financial conditions, but the bank pretty much has to take your word for it. They can investigate if they want, but it seems they often don't. If you're a billionaire, the bank may say, wow, you are a really good risk, so we're going to give you a really low interest rate, 5% interest. And the bank makes that money, that 5%. That's profit to the bank. However, you walk into the bank, the same businessman owning the same assets, and you say, well, I'm not really a billionaire. I'm only a millionaire. And here are the numbers I wrote down on this piece of paper to prove it. The bank may say, okay, you are a somewhat greater risk. We're going to give you a loan, but we're going to make you pay 8%. So it's an 8% profit that the bank is making. Let's assume you're a thousandaire. You go into the bank and you're like, well, my assets aren't worth that much. The bank may say, okay, you pose a serious risk. If we're going to lend you money, you're going to have to pay 12% interest. So you can see how if somebody lies about the value of their assets, what they're doing is they're actually fraudulently getting a lower interest rate thereby defrauding the bank out of money that they could have made in the way of interest that you would have had to have paid, or the bank could have decided to loan other people money. So it's a little bit complicated when you break down how it is that Donald Trump defrauded people by hundreds of millions of dollars, but that's one way he did it. Now let's look at one banking institution in particular, Deutsche Bank. Probably heard a lot about Deutsche Bank because they've done a lot of business with Donald Trump over the years. Some of it has kind of gone south, often courtesy of Donald Trump's fraud. And in this 102-page motion that Tish James just filed with the judge, basically what she filed is an aid to the closing argument that her attorneys are going to give Judge Engoron on January 11th. This is kind of a preview, giving the judge some time to sit with the numbers and the arguments before the closing arguments actually take place on January 11th. She said Deutsche Bank alone, by virtue of Donald Trump's systemic fraud, overvaluing his assets, forensic accounting experts calculate the loss to Deutsche Bank in interest alone to be $168 million. So that accounts for a healthy dose of the $370 million she's seeking. And again, Deutsche Bank is just one institution that was defrauded by Trump and company. But that is kind of a layman's friendly, I hope, explanation of how some of these numbers were arrived at.
Well, Glenn, if it was the banks that were defrauded, why aren't those banks themselves bringing suit against Trump? Why is it the New York Attorney General?
You know, it's a good question. The New York Attorney General is basically a representative of the people of the state of New York. And when she sees fraud, and that fraud militates in favor of bringing a civil suit to put a stop to it and hopefully to deter other businessmen and businesswomen from engaging in similar fraud, she's going to bring a suit. And that's what she did. I can't speak to the banks. The banks, I think, make a cost benefit calculation. Do we want to be suing people, especially people who maybe paid the loans back,
Right.
even if they did defraud us out of some of the interest we could have otherwise earned? But listen, these banks are involved in the day-to-day business of loaning out money, and it could very well be a business calculation that the last thing we want to do is have the people that are coming to us for loans, particularly, the high value business people, think, well, Deutsche Bank is going to turn around and sue me. So it feels to me like more of a business calculation by Deutsche Bank, though, full disclosure, I don't know what is driving their decision-making train, but that makes some sense to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. What about the other half of this, which is that Donald Trump, by virtue of undervaluing his assets when it came to taxes, that he defrauded the people of New York out of those tax revenues that would otherwise go to the state?
Brian, that's a great question and a bit of a curiosity to me. And here's why I say that. First of all, that really wasn't the focus of this civil case. If he committed crimes, tax crimes against the state of New York, and in a very real sense, against the people of New York, those are charges that would be brought by the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, who brings criminal cases,
Okay.
whereas Tish James, as the Attorney General, brings state cases. But it's a curiosity to me for the following reason. Remember, Donald Trump's longtime chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, was prosecuted for a 15-year-long criminal scheme to defraud in violation of New York state law. Criminal scheme to defraud in the first degree. That was the charge. What did he do? He pleaded guilty to those crimes. And Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in Manhattan, brought a criminal prosecution against the Trump organization in New York. The organization that bears his name took them to trial. Alan Weisselberg testified against the Trump organization, even though he was a criminal member of that organization. And the organization was convicted of a 15-year-long criminal scheme to defraud in the first degree. And much of this involved potential tax crimes, tax revenue that was not paid to the people of New York. My question, Brian, is why in the world has Donald Trump not been criminally prosecuted for the same 15-year-long criminal scheme to defraud in the first degree and for the tax crimes that go along with it. And let's remember, not only state tax crimes, but there are potential federal tax crimes. And Donald Trump has not been charged federally with any tax crimes. I understand why that is when he was president and he corrupted the Department of Justice and Bill Barr to do his dirty bidding. But, you know, it's a new day and we
Right.
have an honorable administration and a law-abiding attorney general, even if he's not as aggressive as we would like. And I would like to know why none of those tax charges have been brought against Donald Trump.
Okay, well, let's finish off with this. What's the timeline for the rest of this case here, especially with regard to appeals?
So we're going to have closing arguments on January 11th. And I think Judge Engoron has said he's going to take a couple of weeks to kind of sit with the arguments that have been made and absorb these mega filings that are being offered to the court in aid of, you know, his decision. And so once we get a verdict from Judge Engoron, it's anybody's guess how long the appeals will take. I can tell you, having been involved in appeals for many, many, many years as a federal prosecutor, they can take a very long time. I don't know how long or how backlogged the state of New York's appellate court system is, but I wouldn't expect a resolution of the appeal anytime soon. But that doesn't mean Donald Trump can't be ordered to pay in the event Judge Engoron goes with New York State Attorney General Letitia James' recommendation, $370 million. He could be ordered to pay that even pending appeal, or he could be made to put up a money bond. So there will be a pot of money from which a judgment could be paid out after the appeals were exhausted. So right now, it would just be rank speculation about how long this whole thing may linger on appeal.
Okay, well, we'll obviously stay on top of this for as long as it goes, even if it's years. So, Glenn, I hope you're ready to hunker down here because we can be here for a while. With that said, for those watching, if you want to follow along with this case, please make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.